Hello. So my name is Paul, and I'm a stroke survivor. Before I begin, I just want to thank, Nick and the team from Brain Injury Australia for giving me this opportunity to talk about stroke. Just a little bit about myself. I had my stroke back in 2018, and so I've been living with a brain injury for 6 years. And since then, I've developed an unwavering passion to give back to the stroke community. And I do this as a peer support mentor in our local SA hospitals, where I have the absolute privilege of talking to fellow stroke survivors in a one-on-one, face-to-face. But today isn't about telling my story. It's really about sharing what I've learnt these last 6 years. Now, a stroke, in very layman's terms, is damage caused to the brain by the sudden disruption of blood supply and therefore oxygen. And it only takes 4 to 6 minutes of lack of blood to the brain before irreversible damage begins. But I guess what really makes a stroke quite different from many of the other brain injuries is just how they can occur suddenly and often without warning. Unfortunately, there are many myths surrounding stroke that really need to be dispelled. And the first myth that needs to be busted is stroke is an older person's ailment. And I was probably definitely guilty of thinking that myself. I didn't even really know what a stroke was, to be honest. I knew it was pretty bad. My grandfather died from a stroke, but I just assumed it was just something that happened to older people. I just want to quickly talk about a woman named Tennille, who I connected with through social media. Tennille was an ordinary 13-year-old girl when she had her stroke. Yeah, 13. She's obviously a grown woman now, but on social media, I've also talked to survivors who had a stroke as a baby. In fact, I remember talking to this one woman who they believe had a stroke while she was being delivered into the world. That's a baby. So it's really important to understand that, we have one extreme. I guess a baby can have a stroke. We know that 100-plus-year-olds can have a stroke. So anywhere in the middle, you can have a stroke, which is quite scary. And the next myth that I really wanted to dispel is strokes happen to unfit people. Now, I personally find this one particularly annoying. You see, when I had my stroke, I was a fairly fit bloke. I was running half marathons. In fact, I was training for my first full marathon and was literally in the middle of a run when I had my stroke. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important to understand that strokes can happen to anyone, regardless of how fit you are. But what really staggers me in 2024 is that people still believe that strokes are for the elderly or unfit. And the number of times that I've heard someone say to me, "Hey, Paul, gee, you were young when you had a stroke," that really proves that the message is just not sinking in at all. Can you imagine if I said that about cancer? That cancer only happens to the elderly or unfit. So I'm just a bit shaky. Bear with me. If I said that about cancers of people, you'd be all chasing me around with pitchforks, right? So we need to break down the barriers of age and health and recognise that a stroke can happen to anyone. We also need to raise awareness and education about stroke. But one thing the cancer advocates have done amazingly well over the years is the awareness and educational campaigns. For years, we've been saturated with cancer warnings and that type of thing, for very, very good reason. We hear about being sun smart, we hear about regular scans, we hear about checks, we're encouraged to get our skin looked at, we're encouraged to get regular screenings. Why? Because everyone knows that cancer can strike anyone at any time. And unfortunately, that is exactly the same as stroke. In fact, according to the Stroke Foundation, someone in Australia is having a stroke every 19 minutes. 19 minutes. That's just crazy. But where I feel a stroke is more sinister to the likes of cancer, or even respectfully to many other brain injuries, is honestly how quickly and ferociously they can occur while just doing normal everyday things. I just want to share some testimonies from the stroke community that I'm heavily involved in about what the stroke survivors were doing at the very moment they had their stroke. So Daphnia, she'd just gone to bed. Carla had just got to work. Gracie, I was at work. Terry, I was in the shower. Christine, she was sleeping. Jamie, attending a soccer game. Carolyn was sitting in church. Darlene was sleeping. Carol was sleeping. Lisa was sleeping. Tommy was just watching TV. Deborah was using the toilet. Marion was having a massage. Carl was working from home. Kathy was watching a play. Vanessa was on the way to the airport. Andrea was making breakfast. Christine was just picking up a 7-day-old baby. And Daniel was drinking a coffee. Drinking a coffee. I just want to stop there because Daniel is someone that I've made friends with while doing my peer support. And Daniel sustained a life-changing brain injury that has left him with a permanent disability while he was just drinking a coffee. He was telling me he was putting the coffee to his mouth, and the coffee, instead of going down to his mouth, was just pouring all over his shirt. He now suffers with right-sided weakness and speech challenges, and that's how scary strokes are. Strokes can come out of nowhere and can literally happen at any time, just like that. And as I said, I was in the middle of a run. And stroke is the leading cause of long-term disability in the world. And what's more, strokes kill more women than breast cancer and more men than prostate cancer. So here we have an insidious medical condition that can strike without warning, leave you permanently disabled or dead, can happen at any age, does not care how fit you are. And this is exactly why it's our turn to shine the light on strokes, to ensure that we raise awareness in educational campaigns of our own. It needs to be more than just the FAST acronym. I'm sure most of you know the FAST acronym. Yep, face drooping, can't raise the arms, speech is slurred, or you're not talking properly, time to get an ambulance. And although the FAST campaign is a wonderful start, I still hear people say that, although they had the symptoms, those classic symptoms of stroke, they thought they were still way too young and therefore didn't believe they were having a stroke. And we all know that time is crucial. So, my goal here is to drive home that strokes don't discriminate, age nor health. But now I want to touch on something which is probably closest to my heart in this whole journey, and that is support after stroke. And it was amazing actually hearing the people talk before me today, because everyone's talking about the power of that peer support and that type of thing, which is amazing. So I'm going to follow suit, right? But what is support? Support in my mind is probably 3 distinct phases. We have that acute or hospital phase, which is pretty much where every stroke survivor begins their journey. In the hospital where they're getting their vitals looked at and monitored. And they stay there until they're stable. And in this state, we're doing a marvellous job. We've got world-class hospitals in this state, which is amazing. So I really feel that that part of support is ticked great. The next phase, I guess, is that subacute or rehab phase. And I find this one interesting because not everyone who has a stroke actually requires any rehab. So those who do need rehab, we do have these amazing facilities. I was in one myself for a very, very long time. Again, in this state, we've got a wonderful support for that acute, subacute phase. But the last phase of support, in my opinion, is the most important. And this is the social and the community-based support. And this level of support doesn't have a time frame. This is the forever support, a means by which survivors struggling with the life-changing conditions they have, that they're going through, they know they never have to do it alone. And I'll tell you right now, when you get a bunch of stroke survivors sitting in a room together, and everyone realised that some of the things that one person's going through, everyone else is going through, it is the most powerful, powerful thing. People suddenly don't feel alone. They get validation that what they're experiencing is normal. And people are social creatures. We do need each other. I just really want to share another story about a gentleman named Frank. Frank was a 94-year-old man that I met at the Hampstead Rehab Centre. Frank had never married, nor had any children. And in the 4 to 5 weeks that I caught up with him, he didn't have one single person who visited him. He was just stuck in a wheelchair in front of the TV. I remember asking him one day if he had even been outside at all since he'd been there, and he replied he hadn't. And so I asked him if he wanted to go outside, and you should have seen his smile. It was amazing. And yeah, Frank was lonely, and although he had all the rehab supports around him, he didn't have any social supports in the system. And that really, really upset me, and I've always remembered this. And it scares me to think how many Franks will go through our system without anyone. Unfortunately, way too many survivors aren't even fully aware of the social and community supports that actually exist in our community, and therefore end up falling between the cracks or become completely isolated or sadly forgotten. And everyone deserves support. It's kind of why I push the support groups like those at the Hospital Research Foundation Group, which I'm a volunteer at. They have dedicated stroke support groups across the Metro Adelaide that are fully inclusive. Young, old, tall, short, everyone is welcome. So just to reiterate today's message, right? Because this is all about stroke. Strokes do not discriminate age. They do not discriminate how healthy you are. They can happen to anyone, and they can happen any time. It's, of course, important to recognise the classic stroke symptoms because, as I said earlier, time is of the essence. And please know that if you are unfortunate enough to suffer a stroke, especially here in South Australia, there are people like myself dedicated to the stroke community. Through our support groups, like those at the Hospital Research Foundation Group, we exist to support. You never, ever have to do this alone. Thank you very much.
Wow, what an amazing, compelling, strongly worded message. So thank you so much, Paul, for that very inspiring talk. I definitely got all those key messages there. Really about awareness and education, I think, is just, absolutely key, but also that message about peer supports and social relationships, which I think they underpin everything we do. They underpin life. So I think it's just so important, and you did a great job on time, so thank you very much for that. So our next presentation is from Saran Chamberlain and Dave Flood. Ask them to come up. And they're going to talk to us about isolation and connection. So the journeys of young stroke survivors. So this is reiterating that message that stroke really can happen to young people. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Looks like I'm on my own. Saran got held up at something else, so we'll make it work anyway. There we go. So Dave Flood's my name, and if we look on the screen, we can see my amazing family. So I'm married to Kate, and we've got 3 adult children, all with great partners, and I've got 1 very new grandchild, which is a great time in life. So he's just turned 3 months old. I'm a stroke survivor. I had my stroke in 2019, at the age of 44. And fatigue is the main ongoing impact for me after stroke. Fatigue has a major impact in all areas of my life. It really, has really had a significant impact on what I can do, how much I can engage in, just my energy to be able to do fairly well anything. Before stroke, I was very work and career driven. I'd done a range of things through my career, but all the stuff that I was doing for work was very much around developing people and developing programs that support people. So I've done things such as youth work, adventure camping, management, training and assessing, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, mentoring and counselling. And most of my time outside of work was spent with family. So life for me was very much about connecting with others and creating opportunities for people to connect. Isolation. So after stroke, there was a lot of stuff that I could no longer do because of fatigue. And this in many ways really made me feel like less of a person. Like when you can't do and achieve in the same ways that you used to be able to do, it makes you feel almost useless in some ways. You kind of can feel quite low and quite like I'm not the same person that I used to be, who used to be able to do lots of things, who used to develop programs and make things work and be able to achieve. And this can really kind of knock your self-esteem and self-worth around. So yeah, after my stroke, I started to feel like less of a person. And for me, this caused me to kind of want to pull back and not interact with others so much. So my friendships and relationships kind of slipped away. I didn't want to have to talk about my stroke. When you have something as significant as a stroke in your life, it's kind of the only thing that people tend to talk to you about when you first see them. And it's like, this is incredibly hard and I don't want to have to talk about it. I don't want to have to face it necessarily all the time, every time I see someone that I interact with. And I don't want to have to answer the question of how I'm going, because I'm not really going that well. And I found spending time with other people was very much a reminder of the things that I'd lost and the things that I could no longer do. If I connected and spent time with other people, it was actually really painful. And it was something that I wanted to avoid. So again, it created this desire to step back and desire to want to hide and desire to not want to connect and interact. And because I couldn't work in the same way that I used to, work's very much a big part of our social connection and social community. So I continue to do some work. I do some work as a counsellor still now, but I can only do very limited amounts. Like I'll go into work and do like one session every couple of days. So I don't get that same kind of interaction with work colleagues, which had been a very, very significant part of my kind of social interaction and engagement with other people's journey. So again, creates this sense of isolation. I found going out, travelling, spending time with others, all very fatiguing. Spending time with people is probably one of the most fatiguing things for me. Concentrating on a conversation is actually like really mentally hard work, and you don't realise it. I never had any idea of it before stroke, just how tiring it is to just engage in a conversation with other people. So I found going out, interacting, spending time with other people incredibly fatiguing, and sometimes like to spend a few hours with people would make me absolutely wiped out with fatigue for a day or two afterwards. And it kind of makes you, again, want to pull away and not interact and not engage. Initially for me, my stroke, it seemed relatively minor. Like there was just some sort of visual disturbances when I had my stroke, and I was experiencing some fatigue from very early on, but I kind of thought, a year or two, I reckon I'll be okay. I reckon I'll be able to just kind of jump back into life. I never anticipated that it would be something that was going to have an ongoing impact for me, because it did seem quite minor initially. And it really took me a couple of years to start to, I guess, see and start to accept that stroke was going to have long-term significant impacts in my life. So initially I didn't see that, because I thought, I'll get back into life pretty soon. I didn't kind of see the need to connect with other people who had experienced stroke. I didn't want to engage in that. I didn't want to be identified by my stroke in many ways. So I pulled back rather than seeking opportunities for connection. And for me, like, my stroke's very much an invisible disability. People look at me and they can't see the impact of my stroke. People can't see my fatigue. It's only my family that really see me when fatigue really hits. Like when I'm out there doing things, engaging in things, I can manage that pretty well, but it's when I stop that it really hits hard. So because I present fine and can interact well when I'm feeling good, people don't really see the impact of stroke for me. And again, this can be something that's incredibly isolating. It's like people don't get it, people don't understand, people don't see how much that kind of does have an impact on my life. My family's been incredibly supportive, and I'm truly thankful for that. But I did become very dependent on them as I withdrew a lot from other people. Most of my social needs and social interaction became just about family. And to have a stroke and the impact of stroke creates a whole lot of pressure on your family as it is. Like, they need to take on caring and supporting responsibilities, and greater responsibility with earning income for the family and all that kind of stuff that changes in the family dynamic. And having the pressure of being the social support for someone is just one more thing on an incredibly challenging list already. So I got to a couple of years after my stroke and I was feeling very isolated and very alone. Sarani's here now, so I'm going to get her to jump in and...
Sorry, the joy of stroke and the whole anxiety of getting places and that kind of thing, which is a really good time to obviously bring up connection. So thanks, Dave, and thanks for starting it. So I guess we connected with Genius Network, which was started by Caleb Brixton, who had quite a massive stroke when he was about 25, pretty much starting because there was no other real connection for him. And for us, it took me 8 years to actually sort of be connected with anyone, because again, the same thing, I didn't want to be defined from my stroke. I didn't want to be disabled, and I sort of thought that I'd be better. As we all know from a stroke journey, it's an ongoing journey. So I guess, us connecting, hearing about other people sort of further on certainly gives hope. And then for what happened with Dave and I from a leadership side of things, We then kind of started facilitating those coffee clubs so that we could give others a voice. And we actually found, again, it took me 8 years, but we had some people who were like a month in from a stroke coming into the group, which I thought was massively brave. And we did have the conversation. One of them sort of said, and it's a very common thing, so when am I going to get better? Because our version of better, of cold or anything like that, is you always get better. You don't look at it as in, oh, I'm never going to be this again, because we don't see it as a disability initially. And so we would sort of go, oh, well, don't really want to answer this the way that you want it, but you're not. But it does get better. And there are people like Dave and I where we just sort of get through it. But having that lived experience, having that same kind of, fatigue, or unseen deficits or sensory overload, those kinds of things, really sort of help connect. And I think it just, it empowered us in our own journey as well.
So yeah, connection for me, like I shared lots about feeling quite isolated after stroke, and connection for me, so it was kind of like after a couple of years and I'd pull back a lot and I was just feeling very alone, and I just needed to find other people that understood some of the challenges that I was experiencing. So I found the Genius community online, and there's a QR code if you want to find out more about Genius. But it's an online support community mainly for those who've experienced stroke and brain injury. It's where Saran and I met. And it was the first time that I connected with others that I felt like really got what I was going through. That was incredibly important for me, to feel not so alone in it, and to meet other people that just wanted to be able to get on with life and find ways to make it work. And so it started for me with just linking in with weekly online coffee clubs, where you just meet together and chat, all peers, all mainly younger people who've experienced stroke. So good to connect. And over time, I started to connect more like with people individually too. So Saran and I started to connect, and other people too. So that peer connection's like, it's so important and so valuable, both to feel connected and supported, but also in learning how to do life after stroke. It's like, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to live with fatigue well. And Saran's a bit further in her journey than me. So to have someone that I can say, how do you make life work? Like, what do you do going forwards? Is just so incredibly important and valuable. So yeah, I've made some really significant friendships that have been really important for me. And I've learnt ways of socialising that are manageable, rather than going out for a few hours and wiping myself out to go to an online group for an hour or so, or to connect online or message or something with people for short periods of time works, and it meets that need of just kind of feeling connected and understood and supported far better. And both Saran and I have been quite involved in research projects and things like that. So again, it's a great way to start to feel valuable and useful again after stroke. Like, we've got something to offer and contribute. It makes you feel useful and valuable again when you start to lose some of that, when you feel useless. To have people that value your opinion and perspective on the projects they're working on makes you feel good. And it also creates an opportunity to connect with other people that get it too, who are taking on those lived experience roles, and also volunteering in like stroke projects or brain injury projects can have a very similar, meet similar needs or opportunities there. So yeah, I'm also part of, as well as involvement in Genius. We've done some work on some fatigue programs, and I'm also been part of the development of Young Stroke Service, and I've got some info on that if anyone is interested in finding out any more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just very quickly, you know, connection is key, so don't go it alone. There are people out there. I do wonder whether or not, you know, if I'd made connections earlier, if I would have been further on down the journey, but you don't know, it's all a learning experience. But I think sort of the sooner, the better you make connections, the better it sort of is to live your best life post-stroke. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave and Saran. Glad you got here. So that was fantastic. You got here just in time. Yeah, and I really appreciated those insights about just the effects of fatigue and the impact on impact of having an invisible disability and not feeling like you want to go out in the world. So that was a great insight to hear about the Genius Network and the Young Stroke Network as well. So thank you for telling us about those. We have one more presentation today before lunch, and it's being presented by Mardee Greenham, Dee Honeychurch and Hailey McKirdy, and they're going to be talking to us about the Childhood Stroke Project. So like Paul was saying, you know, children can have strokes, definitely, and so we'll be learning more about the some resources for childhood stroke. So I'll invite you to come up. Thank you.
So we'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of land throughout Australia. We acknowledge their continuing connection to land, water, sky and community. We pay our respects to the people's cultures and elders past, present and emerging. We'd also like to acknowledge the individual and collective experience of our Lived Experience Advisory Group. The lived experience and unique perspectives of both survivors and their parents are key to achieving better outcomes for childhood stroke. We recognise their generous contributions so that we can learn and grow together to achieve better outcomes for all. So Stroke Foundation is a national charity and we partner with community to prevent stroke, save lives and enhance recovery. We're the voice of stroke in Australia and we work alongside survivors of stroke, their families, healthcare professionals and researchers. We work to build awareness in the community and also support survivors through their journey. Childhood stroke occurs in up to 120 babies and up to 400 children per year in Australia. It's among the top 10 causes of death in children, and it's more common in younger children and newborn babies than it is in older children, although it does happen in older children also. There are around 50% of children who have a stroke will have long-term neurological disabilities. Children are usually well prior to their stroke. There are some risk factors that are identified that put children at a higher risk of a stroke, but most of them are well at the time. And in the remainder of children, the risk factors are quite different to adults. So things like clotting disorders and blood vessel issues are more common causes of stroke in children. The signs of stroke in children are different, particularly in babies. Signs can be more subtle. around 10 to 20% of children will have a recurrent stroke. That is less common in the perinatal stroke, the children who have a stroke in the newborn period, which is around 1%. And children and babies, signs can often be missed just because there's a lack of awareness in the community around signs of stroke, or even that stroke occurs in children. So I'm going to hand over to Dee now, who's going to talk about her daughter Emma and her experience on being on the Childhood Stroke Lived Experience Advisory Group.
Hi everyone. So my name's Dee and my daughter Emma is a childhood stroke survivor. This is her when she was born and she's now 9 years old. Emma started showing signs of stroke when she wouldn't acknowledge one side of her body, and I'd take her to mother's group and all the other babies continued to develop, and Emma was really behind in achieving major milestones. I took Emma to a GP 7 times and was turned away, told that I was being a paranoid first-time mum. And I really tried to advocate for a diagnosis, and it wasn't until the maternal child health nurse referred us to a paediatrician, and that's when our life changed forever. Emma was put in an MRI, and she was about 9, nearly 10 months old at that time, and subsequently was diagnosed by the radiologist with an inoperable brain tumour. We were then referred to the Royal Children's Hospital to see a neurosurgeon, where we were given the diagnosis of a periventricular stroke in utero. Obviously, at that point in time, we were relieved. The only outcome that I was hoping for when I took her to the hospital that day was that she would stay alive, that I would be able to bring her home. And that's what we got to do. So I was leaving hospital pretty excited and relieved, only to realise that I'd just walked out of the most incredible, and is the most incredible children's hospital in Australia, the Royal Children's Hospital, without an ounce of information about perinatal stroke. Not one thing. Nothing to guide me to the path forward. No information about perinatal stroke, no connection to support. And as a family who coped quite well, we weren't referred to social work. We had no other, healthcare staff would consider vulnerabilities. So we were just told to leave and get on with our lives. I guess the difficult part of that is that we were unaware of the total wrath of service system navigation that we would have to undertake for the rest of Emma's life. And we didn't even know where to start. It was then that I reached out to the Stroke Foundation to ask about what support the Stroke Foundation could provide our families, and there was nothing. The Stroke Foundation connected us, or myself, to another mum who'd also reached out for support, and together we co-founded Little Stroke Warriors Australia and New Zealand. And again, reflecting on what other members of the stroke community have said earlier, we developed a peer support group and it grew very, very quickly. The peer support group consisted mainly of parents. It still is in existence. And as we heard people's stories, we realised there were common themes and that perhaps the support group wasn't enough for us to move forward. So that's when our advocacy journey began. So Kylie Facer and I, who is the mum that co-founded Little Stroke Warriors with myself, we went to the Stroke Foundation with a business plan, expecting to be told we can't do anything for you, about what the needs and wants of our community were. And to our very pleasant surprise, they said, yes, let's see what we can do to help you. We then partnered with the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and the stroke team at the Royal Children's Hospital, and we developed a plan that we would raise awareness of stroke and develop resources for families and people who had a stroke or children who had a stroke, and we would make them feel less alone on their journey. The first project that we were able to co-design with the Stroke Foundation was the Our Family Stroke Journey booklet. And this was a booklet that would navigate the pathway to recovery. Sorry, not recovery, we've just had a whole session about talking about that word. But the pathway through living with stroke as a child, and for families to know what support is available. And we included the voices of lived experience in that information booklet as well. From there, I remember I was working in an emergency department at the time, and I'm not a doctor or a nurse, just want to say that, but I was working in an emergency department, and I'd see people coming in having strokes every what seemed like every hour at times, and they'd be treated within the critical 4-hour time frame. But then I would have all these inbox messages blowing up in my Facebook saying, my child has not been diagnosed for 2 weeks, a month, 3 months. And the inequity of stroke care for children versus adults, and I know there's so much work to do in the adult space, so I just want to acknowledge that, was glaring. And that's when we went to the federal government, the Stroke Foundation and the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and we were very successful in getting $4 million of research funding for the Paediatric Acute Code Stroke Project. And that would mean that any child that attended a major children's hospital in Australia wouldn't be turned away when they had stroke symptoms. And already we've saved quite a number of lives with those protocols in place. From there, the Stroke Foundation launched the Childhood Stroke Project, and that's when Mardee, the incredible Mardee, joined the team and began to lead this work that we've been doing. And Mardee will show you what those resources are shortly. The Childhood Stroke Project is led by the Childhood Stroke Lived Experience Advisory Group, and we are extremely lucky to work together as parents and people who've had a stroke, children who are now adults, to co-design resources and, I guess, change the way that childhood stroke is seen in Australia. Actually, to get it seen is the first step. And now we are developing world-first resources that are being considered to be used in countries all over the world, which is really exciting to know that we've managed to reach that many people. I'm going to hand back to Mardee to talk more about the Lived Experience Advisory Group, but I just want to say this. I am truly honoured to have been brought into this incredible community. If my daughter didn't have a stroke, there is no way I wouldn't have met the most amazing people that I think exist in this world. And I just want to encourage you all to listen to the voices of lived experience, however that voice is presented. People who are non-speaking, they also have a voice. And to align your practice with those voices. So, thank you.
Thanks, Dee. I'm going to skip through a few slides because I think we're almost out of time, and I really want Hailey to be able to speak. So this is our Lived Experience Advisory Group at a recent meeting that we had. We have a number of resources that we've developed. Okay, great, excellent, thank you. We have a number of resources that we've developed with the Lived Experience Advisory Group. Their contributions have been vital in the development of these. We also consult quite a lot with the Little Stroke Warriors community in developing these resources and getting their feedback, making sure that they're really hitting the mark. So that's been a really important part of the project. All of our resources can be found on the Stroke Foundation website, but I will hand over to Hailey now.
Hi everyone, my name's Hailey. I'm honoured to be a part of the Childhood Stroke Lived Experience Advisory Group. I'm here today to represent the voices of those who have personal experience with childhood stroke. I had a stroke at the age of 6 in my first year of primary school. I had a stroke while I was in bed trying to fall asleep. This experience not only completely altered the course of my life, but also dealt with internal struggles of loss of identity, friendships, and my place in the community that I knew, and my connection I had with my own body. I remember asking my mum if there were others like me, and unfortunately, she couldn't find any resources specifically for childhood stroke. This left me feeling really isolated and struggling to understand and cope with emotions. As I grew older, these unresolved feelings had a negative impact on my mental health. I felt very different from my peers and was uncertain of what the future would hold. This also had an effect on my family, creating a difficult and challenging environment for us to move forward together as a unit. However, I'm a proud member of this team at the Stroke Foundation and have been a part of creating resources for those who have gone through similar experiences. We have worked hard to fill gaps and resources for childhood stroke survivors and provide a platform for those at the beginning of their journey to realise that they are not alone. I am grateful for the positive impact that this project has had on the world of childhood stroke. It brings me joy to know that our efforts have made the journey a little less daunting for others. The feedback that we've received from the resources that we have created has not only been overwhelmingly positive, with a helpfulness rating of 4.6 out of 5, and direct feedback saying, I love the podcast, hearing struggles and triumphs of though others made it through, others making me feel less alone, and hearing stories help me battle and face obstacles around treatment, support and care. I know that I have made a difference and brought childhood stroke into the forefront along with my team, and promoting valued roles for lived experience has been a reward in itself.
Okay, so there's just some of those quotes there. I think we do we have any time for questions? No? Okay, well thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that beautiful presentation. I think this presentation, along with all that we've had here today, are really making us think about the impact of advocacy and education and increasing awareness about stroke particularly, but really thinking about it being across the lifespan and that importance of developing community supports and togetherness and reducing those feelings of isolation, really whatever age you have a stroke. So I think, you know, the work that has been described today in the various networks is, yeah, it's just good to get that news out there and, you know, help make sure people are using it. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Could you all thank all our speakers today?